My name's Amias Morse. I am the Controller and Auditor General, and I'm the Chief Executive also of the National Audit Office. Perhaps a little bit about myself, only insofar as it's relevant to this. Probably useful for you to know that my background is, for quite a lot of my life, as a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers. So you may say whether that's a commendation or a demerit. I leave it for you. You can fill in the blanks. But it does mean that I spent most of my working life in the private sector. 3 years ago, I went to the Ministry of Defence, where I became the commercial director of the Ministry of Defence and had a exciting time at the MOD, doing the sort of business I never dreamt I would be doing, involving some very large pieces of equipment, which I'll leave you to speculate on. But very fascinating to see government from the inside and to understand what that was like. And if you're an outsider and you haven't actually worked within government, you can't possibly imagine the reality. It's very hard, even for suppliers, to understand how things work within government. They think they know, and advisors think they know, and they really don't have deep insight. I suppose that's an argument for secondment. And then roughly a month ago, I started as Controller and Auditor General. So I'm delighted. Obviously, innovation is on my personal agenda, and very pleased to be talking to you about it. And I won't talk for too long and hope to have plenty of time for questions, but when we run out of questions, that's the end of the session, and if we finish earlier than the specified time, that's absolutely fine by me as well. I should say that in case, if you might reflect that with a month's track record, I may, the context may not be as deep as you might like, and in that case I have somebody who really knows a lot about the work we've done and the reports that we've written, Sandy Gordon, who I will call up, as it were, a genie with a lamp in case of need, and probably anyway as well, Sandy, I'm sorry to tell you, when we get to question time. So why are we talking about innovation, and learning? And I can understand that you might find it slightly counterintuitive. Well, perhaps not. Perhaps you think the first thing you think of when you think of an auditor is innovation and wild, risky things like that. I don't know. If that's your view, don't let me get in your way, because I appreciate it. But anyway, no. What we're talking about it for? First of all, I suppose it's worth saying something about the reality of the NAO. And quite apart from doing audit work, we do a lot of work trying to test value for money across a whole range of activities in government, many of them very individual, and where it's not obvious exactly how we're going to be able to measure and show and produce evidence of whether value for money is being achieved, what the value is being generated, and how much money is being spent are often fairly opaque, you'll be astonished to hear. So we are the people who are interested in measuring, evaluating, and giving, as far as we possibly can, objective assessment of what works and what doesn't and what priorities there should be. And I'm quite keen, as far as possible, to infect government generally with that particular virus to the extent that it isn't already, which I don't have any evidence of at the moment. So the challenges that we face now and for the next predictable few years in government are going to require innovation. You've heard from many people what those challenges are, and quite evidently they include the need to deal with restricted budgets. I will predict to you that will mean a change in the way we work and less headcount intensity in the way we work over the next few years. What's the value of that prediction? Quite high, I would say, because when you look at if you look at cost reduction and you look at our overall cost profile in the public sector, you'll find that a very large proportion of it is, in fact, people costs. So any significant reduction is going to involve, over time, reducing the number of people involved in providing public services, and it is going to involve, over time, I hope, first, finding new ways to work as effectively, if not more effectively, than we did before, with a different people mix, different skill mix, different people mix, and I hope using information a lot more. So innovation is, in my view, on the agenda of the public sector in a big way, willy-nilly, and it's on our agenda too, because we want to measure and encourage innovation where we see it. So this isn't something that I regard as just an interesting discussion. I hope it will be that, but there's a lot more. It's something we're going to be it's going to be at the center of our reality for the next few years, whether we like it or not. And it's striking, as we look across the gamut of activity in government, we see the same patterns again and again. And even in the time I've been in my role, and I'm doing a lot of reading and looking across all our reports, you see the same issues arising again and again. Clear that we need to get a way of drawing out consequences, doing a better job of organizational learning, and taking the consequences of something that has either worked or hasn't worked in one place and understanding how that might transpose. So I think there really is a challenge. Innovation is not about having brilliant ideas, it's about implementing them successfully. And if you just have a bright idea and it falls flat and doesn't get carried through, it's really not worth anything. And that requires systems and processes. It requires us to be able to capture ideas, decide the ones we're going to run with, share those ideas, and have a generalized approach and disciplined approach to implementation. It's funny to say these words alongside innovation, but without that, innovation largely speaking, doesn't work. I'm going to talk about the findings that we have from two NAO reports on innovation across central government and on helping government learn, which are the foundation for what we're saying. And I will say something about, based on those reports, what we find ourselves expecting from the centre of government and government departments following on from that work. So what do we find? Well, first of all, most innovation in most government organisations comes from the top at the moment. All departments told us that innovation is needed to achieve the department's objectives, and there are positive case examples of how innovation can be successful that are to be found across government, as I hope you'd expect, and it's certainly true. They're very credible examples. But at the front line, staff had lots of ideas for improvement and did not believe that those ideas were a priority. That's based on sampling across a large population. There's untapped potential to realize innovations from the front line, from suppliers, I'll say more about this, and from service users. And innovation is hindered by lack of awareness about where people who have innovative ideas might be able to get support. So these are clear findings that we found. What do we find on learning? Well, there's good progress. Capability reviews show improvement, and the importance of organisational learning is increasingly recognised and valued. Leaders could act as role models and give greater priority to learning than generally speaking they are seen to do. Silo structures prevent learning as knowledge is not shared within or between organisations, certainly not optimally shared. And I guess if you think about your own working reality, how much information is shared and how widely and how effectively. Networks of people across organisations were the most effective way of spreading learning. And you might add, perhaps, of spreading information as well, in more general terms, as to what's going on. So, and finally, processes at the centre of government are good at collecting knowledge through gateway reviews and other processes, but not good at making it available for wider use. So they suck it up, but they don't send it out. So both reports pointed to similar themes, that leadership is important and it's determinative of success of innovation. There's a need for a systematic approach. Structures and processes matter. There is untapped potential. There's ideas and knowledge which aren't used, and case examples in both reports show that it can be done. It is being done very successfully in places. So first of all, leadership is important. Well, central government have all stated support for innovation and all said it was needed to achieve their strategic objectives, but local staff don't get that message. As I said earlier, they have ideas for improvement, but saw innovation as clashing with all the pressures and the other priorities that they have in their jobs. Not surprisingly, this means that much of the innovation we saw when we did our work really top down. And of course, that does give problems when it comes to implementation, because from the top of a mountain, you can really not see the lower slopes. You can just see immediately below you. And you may think you're really connected, but the size of these organizations, you're kidding. You just, unless you have a way of getting down to what the reality is at the delivery front, it's very hard to know from a very senior position. You may come up with a brilliant idea, which may have some fundamental reason why it just doesn't work very well. You need to have that ability to hear what's happening. Leaders need to explain better. Innovation is needed to meet departmental objectives and efficiency improvements. It's not an end in itself. And sometimes innovation gets talked about as if it was just a good thing. Let's talk about innovation. I mean, the subject innovation, people write papers about it, and it's a sort of do-good type subject, not something which is intended to drive better performance. And if it doesn't drive better performance and confer benefits, it's really not worth anything, is it? And frontline staff need to be empowered to innovate, and they need to be told that by the leadership, and to overcome the belief that we find that they are not really empowered to innovate. That needs a very systematic, not just telling, but altering of processes. It can be done, as we've said, the Angels and Dragons scheme in HMRC is an example, which allowed senior management to give the message and show that innovation really was wanted, and also to give recognition to the people who came up with the ideas, because they got the job of leading on implementation. So it's not a question you just give the idea, somebody says thanks very much and gives you some sort of award or something. You actually get your life changes as a result of coming up with a good idea to some extent. A more systematic approach is important. Most departments have some support for innovation, but few have a strategy. And I know you think, well, it's sort of a typical auditor talk, but a clear logic for how it's supposed to work, how it's supposed to change things, what does it drive? Those which do, such as the Department of Health, really have a better understanding of where their priorities lie and where to concentrate the effort to improve. And it's not good enough to just have a generalized call to innovate. That doesn't really achieve very much, to be quite honest. Unstructured experimentation is not what we need. Organizations should be looking to seize opportunities for transformational change, but that requires clear priorities and a decision as to where to put the effort and where not to put it. Innovation and learning are more likely to happen in a structured environment with a clear strategy, good quality information, and knowledge management. Because that means that the good idea is picked up, empowered, made possible to implement, the effect is measured, the resource goes where it's going to have the best effect. And as I've said, Angels and Dragons is a good example of how that might happen. Untapped potential. Well, as I said, most innovations come from the top, but there is untapped potential for innovation from the front line. And I want to say a bit more about also from suppliers, because certainly experience in the MOD was, in many ways, the suppliers, the individuals in the suppliers had been around in that situation for far longer than their counterparties in the MOD had, in the same job, seeing the same problem again and again. And if you ask them the right way, which is not in the middle of awarding a contract to them, how do I do this better? Would you do it like this? You'd be amazed. They really like participating in that. It is worth asking suppliers, particularly when they're relatively sophisticated organizations who are going to be thinking about it, to contribute their thoughts about how things can be done more effectively and better. And it's surprising. You can tell the self-interested stuff quite easily from the stuff that's genuinely disinterested and trying to encourage change. And also, obviously, you should ask service users, what's it like? What could we do that would make this better for you? Nothing wrong with that either. The productive ward, which is an example in our Helping Government Learn paper, and obviously a healthcare example, shows that allowing frontline staff to decide how best to run their service works if there is a clear process and the right support to make changes. There are examples of it in the innovation report, like Show Us a Better Way, general public being invited to suggest better ways to provide government data. Iris scanning at the national border, where we asked the suppliers how to implement, and they gave us advice. Many other examples where just talking to people and getting them to contribute is worthwhile. And we need to get better at spreading innovative practice. The way this has been done in the private sector is through simplification and standardization. Once you get a good idea, get the essential piece, be able to roll it out quickly and standardize procedures. If you have everybody doing things in a different way, then that new idea has got to fit in differently every time it tries to be put into an activity. So, oddly enough, a more disciplined and standardized environment can use ideas and innovations much more effectively than one which isn't structured in that way. There are too many examples of public sector innovation not being scaled. So, good idea, stayed exactly where it was, didn't really go anywhere. Flood Warning Direct was an example, good example of innovation using text messages and internet, did away with the need for manpower-intensive local systems to tell people about floods. So there are examples that you find of clever, it's not the invention of nuclear fission, it's a practical, sensible extension application. Text messages, you get them all the time, information on text, yes, we know about that. Why not use it here? Now, that is a really valuable type of innovation. So what do we expect from the centre, summarising our thoughts on this? Well, first of all, we want to see departments have clearer responsibilities between the centre and the line, more visible support and access to shared knowledge, and a rationalization of guidance, because people just don't read endless guidance. There's no point producing. If you have to have more than one bookshelf for the guidance, who's going to read it? You've got your work to do. The role of the centre is to assist in developing strategies and spreading good practice. That's what they can do, not command and control. Relying on the centre for answers actually stifles, and if you have a culture that says, wait for us to tell you what to do, that stifles local initiative. We're not going to get innovation by telling people how to do their jobs or to deliver more of the same. The incentive should be about making improvements to services, and people should feel motivated towards that. And we need to work to improve measurement of performance. At the moment, information gaps hinder managed performance improvement. What departments need is to use knowledge and information more intelligently through their operations to help them perform better. And the reason that matters is because, obviously, if you can see differentiated bad performance or cost-intensive activity, that's where you need innovation and change. You can demonstrate that an innovative solution is working better, one solution is working better than another. You can actually demonstrate where something's going wrong and help is needed. And you can assess whether an innovative activity is actually working, or if it's clearly not working, you can decide to stop it. And that is very important. There is absolutely no point having fruitless innovations all over the place. You need to go encourage people to put ideas up, analyze, listen, look at them, see how they're working, look at the evidence, and then say, great idea, you know what, we're not going to continue with that one, but keep on coming up with ideas. Don't let them all just carry on. And you do find examples of that sort of skunk works activity. Something has been decided against, but it still continues. Unbelievable. Well, believable, in fact. We need to stop it, though. So what do we expect from departments? We expect that they will try, that they'll be willing to try new solutions to big problems, including the problem of getting more from less, which is a central problem we're all going to face, as I said earlier. We don't expect all those things to work, but we do expect that when something goes wrong, we actually learn from it. And we expect that some activities that are less successful will stop quickly, as I said. Departments need to have a good enough measures of performance to know when to stop. And we expect leaders to promote change. So, a more systematic approach is key to making this happen. Most departments have some support for innovation, but few have strategies, and that is what's required. So I talked earlier about clarity of purpose and drive from leadership. It's very important that that continues after change in leader. And it's considering the frequent moves of jobs. If you're talking to yourself as a leader of a department, or as somebody who's got a significant responsibility, and you believe in the change processes that you're driving, it's critical that you continue, you send that heritage forward. You don't just say, well, I drove it, then I've gone off, nobody's bothering to push it now. And you find that examples of that sort of wreckage of half-completed initiatives and innovations all over departments. If it's worth doing, you've got to build it in its life so it stays going for the long term. That means that one leader has to adopt the messages of the one that preceded them. I've seen good ideas founded from lack of leadership. And innovations we examined all needed support from the top to succeed. At some point, there was always a conflict of interest on resourcing, and it always needed intervention. But that's not enough. We need to get a culture of learning and improvement. If only the ideas that catch the eye of top management get accepted. Leaders need to go beyond sponsoring specific innovations to create a culture of learning, something where they're not just saying what's to be done, but there's a process which encourages learning and innovation across the board. Don't underestimate how much effort it will take to get this message across. It's not about communication. It's about walking the talk. It's about people being seen to get results and to get rewards and get recognition for being innovators. And what would we expect a more innovative public sector to look like? Well, it would be one which was constantly changing, embracing constant incremental change and regarding that as important and just as important as transformational change. Because remember, transformational change has high risk associated with it. To make a difference, when a change process works or an innovation works, it must be replicated across the public sector as far as is relevant. And in the ideal culture, everyone focused on improving and everyone empowered to change and drive that improvement. So it needs to be routine to innovate and to learn. This needs to be supported by well-managed risk-taking, and failure needs to be tolerated if lessons are really being learned. There are good examples out there, not all involving radical change, many of them involving small practical steps that make a big difference. So, my conclusion, innovation is easy to say and difficult to do and difficult to sustain. But in this cycle it really matters, and it needs not only leadership, good information, but full and determined implementation. probably the thing that matters the most to us, and is sometimes in the public sector the thing that we need to work hardest at, really driving implementations through. So iterative change implemented with determination, seen through to the end.